Hola, Norteamericanos y amigos. I'm your host, Greg Patten. Welcome to the Daily Spit Take, and I don't want to waste your time, so let's just get to the NFL draft. Yeah, so I want to give just a little bit of background. I have previously covered the Atlanta Falcons for more than a decade, and since they are the talk of the NFL draft for doing something that majority of people would label reckless, irresponsible, and in another way, absolutely trailblazing. So yeah, I've seen this team at the absolute bottom. I covered when Michael Vick went to prison. I covered when Bobby Petrino took over and they had a quarterback roster of Joey Harrington, Chris Redmond, and worst of the worst, Kirk Kittner. I also have seen the Mariota and Desmond Ridder era like a lot of people who have followed this team. I think ownership is suffering PTSD. I think they've seen what happens when you don't have a quarterback, and that is why they spent the $100 million on Kirk Cousins. And yeah, some people are going to say, oh, it's a 4-year deal. Let's be realistic. It's 2 years, $100 million guaranteed. He probably will never see the other $80 million. So you put yourself in the Falcons draft room. And if you go by what I've had sources, other people have now said, they went for a private workout to see Michael Penix Jr. work out. And because they did that, they set themselves up to where people who actually are like, wow, okay, that was back in January. So you had not paid Kirk Cousins, and, you know, he had been connected to the team various times through people I had spoke to. What really did it was you had the situation where this week, after you paid Kirk Cousins, there were little rumblings underground that the Falcons are really serious about Michael Penix. And then yesterday, you have local reporter Zach Klein in Atlanta and you have Adam Schefter both saying, no, the Falcons and Michael Penix is a real thing. This is not just a smokescreen to try and get a team to come up and trade. Like, they legitimately like him enough to take him. And with a draft where everything's just going in a regular order, it's all chalk, man. Like 1 through 7 was nothing but like most people could mock. The biggest was Jim Harbaugh went, you know what? Joe Alt, I know I already have Rashawn Slater playing your position, but I can move one of you to the other side, and that was as controversial as it got. So then Tennessee, who had Joe Alt mocked in every single draft, ends up with a guy I had at 19 or 20 because I thought Jacksonville or Pittsburgh were going to take J.C. Latham. So the Giants do a responsible thing, take a wide receiver. They don't go crazy over J.J. McCarthy. Nobody trades up. Denver's not coming up. The Raiders aren't coming up. Seattle's not coming up. And later we found out they were trying to get ahead of Atlanta. And they were trying to get ahead of Atlanta because they knew the Atlanta Falcons were serious. Michael Penix Jr. is the best thrower of the football in this draft, just on arm talent. Caleb Williams is a better overall prospect, doesn't have the injuries, doesn't have the age. Penix doesn't suffer an injury at Indiana. He's probably a top 5 pick. He's probably ahead of Jaden Daniels because teams are going to go, we want the guy who's ready now. And Washington or New England would have been like, we got a guy who's ready now. We don't have to wait on Drake May's development. We don't have to wait on Jaden Daniels' development. They could have went that direction had Michael Penix Jr. not got hurt at Indiana. But because he got hurt, he was usually 4, 5, 6 on somebody's list of the quarterbacks that you could get. The biggest question becomes, You obviously told Kirk Cousins at a certain point when you were paying him that you were going to do everything you could to win. You were going to give him every opportunity. And the Atlanta Falcons made the decision that they were still going to take a quarterback in the top 10. Now, the majority of people are scratching their heads. The fan base is scratching their heads. And there are outliers, as always. There's always contrarians. I always look at myself typically as a contrarian when it comes to a major decision because I think a lot of people go on pure emotion. Was I shocked they took him? Of course. Did I think they could possibly trade it back in around 15 to 18 to get him if they really wanted him? Yeah, I also thought that because I thought there's only a couple ways this is going to play out for the Falcons. Either they're going to be in on getting back in for a corner or an edge rusher or a wide receiver. They're picking at 43 in the second round, and they have to now put themselves in a position where you really wonder what edge rushers out there that they like. And I've just got to be honest. I think they're going to have to go corner or wide receiver at 43. I don't think there's an edge rusher, and it's 81 sacks the last 3 years, the worst in the NFL. And you still made the decision that you wanted to secure your quarterback of the future because your owner can't live in a world like he did with Bobby Petrino. He can't live in a world like he did with Arthur Smith. And you just took all the goodwill that Kirk Cousins had with, okay, people who were upset they didn't hire Bill Belichick, people who thought, wow, you hired Raheem Morris, who was here back in when you fired Dan Quinn and he was interim coach and you could have given him the job, but instead you wanted to talk to Arthur Smith. The ESPN article comes out that Robert Kraft is influencing Arthur Blank. And the thing that really just doesn't add up is if you're telling me Arthur Blank is 81 and he wants to win now, you're using a top 10 pick on a backup quarterback who you hope you don't have to play for the next 2 years. Terry Fontenot in the press conference last night said, oh, well, we hope, he doesn't play for 4 years. That's insanity. Like, that's another presidential election in the United States that you're talking about, an entire term. So Kirk Cousins is going to have a 4-year term like he's the president, and you're saying that you're hoping that the guy you took at number 8 doesn't see the field. That's insanity. The Atlanta Falcons broke a lot of people last night who had been put up with all the nonsense, who had put up with the meme culture, had put up with just being made fun of. They broke a lot of people last night. I had to see what it looked like at the draft party. I had to see it. And people inside Mercedes-Benz were just like, what? Why? And Kirk Cousins gets the call when they're on the clock. Hey, Kirk, we gave you $100 million guaranteed. We're going to take a quarterback. The analytical side of football has never been more fascinated by the Atlanta Falcons now, because this is the theory coming to life. The Pro Football Focus guys. That level of it's about the numbers, it's about the analytics. Ron Wolf and Andy Reid had a philosophy where you just keep taking quarterbacks until you get it right. The Atlanta Falcons could have two things happening here. One, Kirk Cousins is nowhere near as healthy as they're going to try and claim he is with his Achilles, and they're like, we need an insurance policy and it ain't Taylor Heineke. Because we got to restructure Taylor Heineke's contract anyway now since we drafted Michael Penix, because we're going to need to open up some cap room for whatever else we're going to do. Two, they are about to get the hammer dropped on them for the Kirk Cousins tampering. And they know it, and no one else but the league knows it. Now, the rest of the NFL can laugh and point and do whatever and say, this is crazy. Why would anybody? But they may not know that the NFL told the Atlanta Falcons, hey, you're not going to have a first-round pick next year. And it makes a little more sense if you look at it that way. But we've heard about this kind of strategy. But the difference is the teams who did it. Green Bay was 13-3. They used the 20th pick of the draft, not the 8th. And I just don't know how to explain they're not the same thing. Yes, Jordan Love sat for 2 years. Yes, he got a couple starts when Aaron was out. And Penix may do that with Cousins because he's a 36-year-old quarterback. But it's not the same thing. The Falcons haven't had a winning season since 2017. They haven't made the playoffs since 2017. They have the utmost confidence or idiocy in saying last night, well, we're not going to be back in the top 10 anytime soon. We're going to win so many games that we're not going to be. And yet, Michael Penix Jr. is not going to rush the passer. He's not going to cover wide receivers. And he's not going to catch. He may catch. I don't know. Maybe he will catch balls. They'll put him in a gadget play. Who knows? But that's not really his game. It's obvious. Everyone likes Michael Penix Jr. He's tough. He's got a great arm. He's a good decision. The Joe Flacco comparison should make most Falcon fans go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. C.J. Stroud sees Michael Penix Jr. get picked last night. With Kyle Pitts on the same stream, by the way, and he says, that's me. If you told a Falcon fan you got C.J. Stroud right now, they'd all be doing cartwheels after watching Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota and Taylor Heineke the last 2 years. You'd be doing cartwheels. But the problem is you took him at 8. And you didn't solve when you have clearly, I don't know if it's bottom 5, it's at least bottom 10 defense. You have nobody who can rush the passer. All of your picks in the later rounds on defense have all been mid to a guy who's on the roster. None of them have broke out. None of them have starred. None of your undrafted free agents that you've brought in have lit the team on fire on defense. They were good on defense scheme-wise last year, but they signed a lot of one-year deals, and Jesse Bates covered up a lot of problems. Now, if you go out there today and you trade for Trey Hendrickson from Cincinnati and you get a pass rusher, a lot more goodwill with the Falcon fans. If you somehow get involved, because the 49ers made it clear last night when they took Ricky Pearsall, they're in the Brandon Ayuk's going to get traded business. And so Brandon Ayuk all of a sudden is an Atlanta Falcon. A lot more goodwill. Kirk Cousins is going to relax more. But Kirk knows now the clock's going to tick because everybody knows the old saying, the backup quarterback's the most popular player on the team. And Micah Parsons, C.J. Stroud were telling Kyle Pitts last night, this guy's a dog. He's going to be one of the best guys in your locker room. Everyone loves him. He's tough as nails. And if he wins the locker room and young players who are closer to Michael Penix age feel that, oh, Kirk just doesn't have it or Kirk doesn't look good after, it's Willie Beeman and Dennis Quaid in any given Sunday level, of who's identifying with who. But the Falcons don't have any more goodwill. They have absolutely wasted it with this. And they can be trailblazers if this works. But when it's never worked before this level, when you're the first team in NFL history in 4 straight drafts to go tight end, wide receiver, running back, quarterback, nobody's ever done that in the history of the NFL. It's not a blueprint that teams have copied. Will the Falcons get like a NFL Films 10 years from now about look at how they reinvented the league with saying that we're only taking guys on offense in the first round, when the majority of the league did exactly that last night? Everybody took tackle, quarterback, wide receiver. They all went. The first defensive guy was 15. So if the Falcons love Latu like A lot of people thought, with Jimmy Lake, the defensive coordinator, being the guy who recruited him in college, then yeah, I guess so. The Falcons are trailblazers, but I just don't know how that would actually work out. And the entire focus of the league becomes, does this work, and does somebody copycat it if it actually works? Because most people would say the Falcons should win the division or at least be a wild card team. But if you tell me the Chicago Bears get Caleb Williams and Rome at wide receiver, I'm like, that's a better free agency than the Falcons. That's a better draft, obviously, goes without saying. But, I mean, you're talking about the ideal that this team is supposed to be slowly ramping up into a contender. In 2 years, that their window is 2 years to do this. Well, now they've told you their window is, Cousins doesn't work. We're going to put Penix in, and we're just going to take our lumps. But they're going to continue to maintain they're competing the whole time. That's the problem. This is just the most scatterbrained thing I have seen this franchise do in my entire time, because if you come out and you sell everybody on Kirk Cousins is the guy, we're going to go win with Cousins, and then you take a guy right after, and you're on a rookie deal, which is the best contract in the NFL because you can spend money everywhere else. They're going to waste 2 years of the rookie deal. If you want to come from the positive side, and I like looking at things from different angles, the positive is this. If it works, it's rich man problems. Well, Kirk Cousins isn't great, and Michael Penix is. Then all of a sudden, you don't care anymore. If Kirk Cousins gets hurt, Michael Penix goes in there, and the Falcons win 4 or 5 games in a row with him at quarterback, and then they make the playoffs, and then it's like, well, Kurt might be back. And they go, nope, we're sticking with Penix. All of a sudden, you're like, okay, well, Tony Romo, Dak Prescott, Drew Bledsoe, Tom Brady, like this is how the league has always worked. So it's a rich man problem. It's not something where you're scratching your head. Then you can pay whoever, and your foes today in your division are laughing at you. Baker Mayfield's laughing at you. Derek Carr's laughing at you. Bryce Young doesn't have anything to laugh at because his owner's in a bar the day of the draft saying, take that sign down. And just being completely ridiculous and on brand. David Tepper is when billionaires go bad. He just is the most thin-skinned guy in the world to be throwing drinks at fans. And he can't handle somebody saying, can someone else make the pick? So he stops at a bar. And he gives the bartender an order to take that sign down. And then he probably threatened he'd buy the bar out from under them or some nonsense, I'm sure, too. But, they're embarrassing for their own reasons. Whereas the Falcons, if it worked, have their succession plan. But is the succession plan worth it at 8? I just don't think so. As of right now, I think it's one of the dumbest things I've seen in a long time. And I can understand people looking at the positives, and I really like Michael Penix. As a matter of fact, I spoke this into existence during the Washington-Texas game with one friend and 2 scouts. We were going back and forth in a text about, well, I bet Michael Penix Jr. would look good in the Falcon uniform watching him in the Texas game. Then you look at the tape, and you're like, that was maybe the best performance any quarterback had all year. The Saints, the Seahawks, the Broncos all tried to move up to get Michael Penix. The Rams wanted the Falcons pick at 8, because Raheem Morris was helped out by the Rams front office by talking him up to the Atlanta Falcons to say, oh, you should hire this guy. So you did that. The Rams wanted Brock Bowers. They were trying to get to the Falcons spot at 8 for that. But The Falcons couldn't trade back, take lot 2. So the philosophy was take a quarterback. Bold. Very bold. We joke about this stuff all the time about like anybody who loves analytical numbers in football is like, well, what if you just drafted a quarterback every other year? Well, the Atlanta Falcons are finally going to put the formula to the test. So they are going to have a giant bullseye on them. And so is Kirk Cousins. The first time he misses 5 throws or looks like, ooh, he looks bad. Or what if Michael Penix just dazzles everybody in preseason? All the players start talking. Everybody's like, well, I think we got the guy, but we're not starting him because we want to give Kirk every opportunity. And meanwhile, the Falcons are out there saying, well, in 4 years. We hope in 4 years he'll be ready. It's like, that's insanity. Like, there is no gauge to say about quarterback classes. It's the dumbest thing we do every draft at this time of year. Well, next year's quarterback class won't be as good. And then you draft Zach Wilson. And then you draft J.J. McCarthy. And you draft Jaden Daniels. Because nobody said last year, Jaden Daniels, he's clearly going to be one of the best prospects. No, you had to watch him play. You had to watch Michael Penix Jr. play, and then you're like, after the season, you're like, you know what? That's probably a top 10 quarterback. Carson Beck is probably the guy who we're going to be talking about next year. Like, oh, he's got an NFL arm. Oh, he played at Georgia. Oh, he played against SEC. Oh, he's played in big-time games. Oh, he's a winner. All this nonsense that we throw out without actually looking at the guy's abilities. He'll probably go top 3 next year. But can you name 3 other guys without looking? Quinn Ewers, maybe? You're gonna go with the kid at Ohio State? Like all of a sudden he's gonna jump, he's gonna have a CJ Stroud year, and then you're gonna go, well, we can't possibly get back into the top 10 with this roster. And that's the fallacy of the Falcons. They believe it so thoroughly that they're not going to pick in the top 10 that if it happens next year, Terry's gone. Terry may have thought he reset the clock by drafting a quarterback. That's usually what most GMs do. They keep job security by taking a quarterback and saying, well, we got to give him time. You can't judge him yet. That's not what they did. They can't restart the clock. Kirk Cousins is on the clock. Are they a better team today than they were yesterday? I don't think so. I don't think you solved anything. And the rest of this draft has got to be defense and wide receiver. There's no other alternative. You have no free range to be like, oh, we're going best player available. And people thought he was kidding all the time when he talked about best player available. If Michael Penix was higher than any other player on their board, that's a scout problem because you gotta get out of 8. You got to get back just a little bit. But if those teams didn't want to come up and you had to have Michael Penix, fine. I mean, I get it. Like, that's your guy. You're taking him. And we're going to let everything pass. The analytical minds are going to convince people. I've seen a couple very well-known NFL experts who are like, you know what? The more I think about it, this is not a bad move. We're going to see where it ends up. But that's enough from me today. This has been the Daily Spit Take. I've been your host, Greg Patten, and we'll talk again soon.